Hello, this is David Starr, and in this module of the Mastering the Marketplace series focused on SaaS offers, we're going to take a look at a very simple landing page. First of all, we're going to talk briefly about the role of a landing page, which in many cases you may have by now since you've been watching these videos one by one, I'm sure. And next, we'll see a landing page in action, watch what one can actually do, and then we'll have a look at the code behind that very simple landing page. There's not much code there because there's not much functionality to the very simple landing page that we've built as a demo. And then finally, we'll look at all the data you get access to should you want to display it on your landing page and make a much more sophisticated landing page than the one that we're going to work with today. So we'll start with the purpose of a landing page, which is manyfold. First of all, customers need to validate their subscription information. That is to say, they want to make sure that they're buying the product on the right subscription. So we want to show them that information. We also want to enable the customer to change things on that page should they want to, or should that be part of your setup process. For example, you might have on your landing page the opportunity for a customer to upload their company logo so that that becomes part of their visual when they're using your product. Think of this page as one that confirms the order that they're about to make. They're checking everything on the order confirmation page before they hit subscribe. The first thing a landing page will do is log in the user using Azure Active Directory single sign-on with basic consent. That's the lowest consent that we can ask for. We don't need any more than that to get the details about the subscriber that you'd like to use on your page. Things like name, email, address, and organization. And we also want to show some subscription information, and you'll get that back in a call that we'll see we make in our code. And then finally, we might want to collect additional information. We mentioned that logo, but there could be other additional information you'd like to collect from your customer before actually having them submit to activate the subscription. And finally, it's important to guide your user onto the next steps they're going to take. Are they going to get an email? Are you going to automatically provision their subscription and they can wait for an email to come in 5 minutes, or set the expectation that it's going to take a few days to provision their account? Whatever the case may be, just let the customer know what to expect next. Now, the next thing we're going to see is a humble landing page in action. So let's check that out. So this is Marie, and she's found a SaaS offer that she wants to purchase. So let's jump in with her and purchase that SaaS offer. Marie goes to the offer that has been created for her, and she's going to click into this offer to purchase it. There are several plans available to her. She's going to choose the gold plan, and she'll go ahead and set up and subscribe. And she'll put the required information, which is a resource group, the name of the SaaS instance she'd like to have. So we review and subscribe. This gives her a chance to look at the information of her subscription before she goes ahead and subscribes to it. Now she'll hit subscribe, and we'll wait just a moment while the subscription is provisioned for her. Great! Maria has purchased her subscription, so she can now go to Configure Account Now. And this will take us to the landing page that she will use to verify all the information in her subscription and in her account. You saw there just for a moment that it logged me in through Azure Active Directory, and you can see my information available on the page. And the publisher is giving her a little thank you for your subscription. Please verify this information. So she verifies that this information is indeed what she wants, and then notifies the publisher to activate the account. Now that she's activated the account, the publisher is telling her it's going to take 1 to 3 days for them to get that account activated. This might be because they need to run some back-end scripts, they need to put some databases in place. Whatever the case may be, it may be a very sophisticated SaaS implementation and need some manual work to get it up and running for this particular account. And they're letting her know that she can watch for an email from them with further details on next steps. Let's revisit the landing page. Now that we've submitted a request to the publisher to activate our account, they let us know that it would take a couple of days. When they have actually completed the work of setting up our account, they can activate it. Notice the current subscription state on our subscription. It currently reads pending fulfillment start. Now the publisher actually goes in and activates the subscription. We can refresh the page and note the change in subscription state. The subscription state now reads subscribed, and this means that the publisher has done the work of setting up my account. They have activated through the fulfillment API my subscription, and I'm now being billed for my service that I've subscribed to. Let's talk about scenarios for activating SaaS subscriptions. There's the manual provisioning model, which is exactly what we just saw. The publisher said back to Maria that they're going to manually provision her account. And in this case, it's often true that the publisher receives notification of the subscription through email or a queue or by some other mechanism. Then the publisher actually performs the work of setting up the account, configuring the account, putting all of the pieces in place that it's going to take for the new customer to use their product. And finally, the publisher needs to call the activate endpoint on the SaaS API. And they do this using the subscriber's subscription. This is an alert to the Azure billing system that we can start billing for the product and that it's active and Marie can use it. Secondly, we can look at automated provisioning. Boy, this is really where you want to go if at all possible. In this case, I'm going to walk through just a proposed model for how this might work. So the customer clicks the button or link, please activate my account, and the publisher receives that request. That request can go into a queue or into a database or into some other mechanism that's going to kick off a provisioning process for the customer. We can, on the resulting page, then also let the customer know that the account is in the process of being created. And finally, we perform the automated setup. We can do that with scripts or code or whatever it is that the publisher has behind the scenes that's going to do that automated setup. And again, the last thing that needs to happen is that setup would go ahead and call the activate on the SaaS fulfillment API so that it changes the status of the subscription to subscribed, such that billing can begin occurring and the customer can begin using the product. With all this done, Maria is now subscribed to the SaaS solution, and she's very happy about it, as we can see. Now, she is being billed, of course, as we mentioned, because the activate endpoint's been called, and the publisher has given her access to the solution. All right, now that we've seen a little walkthrough of a landing page and we looked at one that renders some information to the screen, let's look at the code involved in rendering just what we saw on the page. Firstly, we'll talk about the platform. The code's fairly straightforward if you're familiar with .NET. It's an ASP.NET MVC application using Razor views, and it's implemented in C#. Now, here is a list of the NuGet dependencies that the project has. And one of the things I really want to draw our attention to is this package, the marketplace app.sas .client package. This is the one you want to download and take your dependency on. All right, with that, let's get to the code. We're going to start in our startup class that lets us plumb some of the middleware into our application. Now, the first thing we're going to do, I'm just going to scroll up just a tiny bit here, is configure our Azure Active Directory and our Graph API integration. We'll do that with the Add Microsoft Identity Web Authentication method. So with that, we can sign on to AAD, and notice that when we do so, we're asking for user.read permissions on the Graph API. This means that we're asking for the most basic of permissions from the user, and the user will need to give permission to us for user.read when they log into the landing page for the first time. Secondly, we're going to configure our OpenID Connect, and what this really does for us is says that when someone signs out of our application, they're going to be redirected back to the home screen. That's all this is really doing for us. If we go down just a little bit, we can see that we are configuring our JWT bearer options, and we're going to use default authentication scheme on this. And what we are going to check is in the body of the JWT, we're going to look that the valid audience matches our client ID. Now that client ID is actually held in a configuration file that I'll show you in just a moment, but that valid audience should match our client ID. Secondly, we check the valid issuer, which comes from sts.windows.net, and then we build that string using the tenant ID. So it turns out that the valid issuer is stswindows.net/mytenantid, and then we can check that relatively simply. Now I could go ahead and validate the signature part of the JWT, but that's a little more involved, and we're going to save that for a later video. Scrolling down, the next thing we can do is go into configure marketplace services. So we're going to pass in the services object so that we can use dependency injection with it. Now, what we're doing here is we're pulling information out of our configuration, our app.settings. So let's take a look quickly at app.settings, and you'll see that the Azure Active Directory section, this is what we pass in to gain access to our Graph API, has certain things about it that we want from our application registration, our domain, our client ID, our client secret. However, notice that the tenant ID is common. This is the common Microsoft tenant ID that's used to authenticate any user in any tenant, so that we can have people logging into our landing page who aren't necessarily within our own tenant. That's not true of what we set up for the Marketplace API section. Here we put in the client ID, client secret, and tenant ID of the application registration that has been set up for use with our SaaS API. All right, let's get over to our home controller, which is where we actually make our calls to the SaaS Fulfillment API. So at the very top, you can see that we have some attributes that are used for authorization. And you can see in the constructor that a marketplace SaaS client is being injected. We saw the setup for that just a few moments ago. And we can see that a Graph service client is being injected, and we get that from the Graph service. So if we scroll down to the action index async, we can see a few things happening here. Let's scroll down just a little bit more. And this is a very, very simple action. What it does is it simply takes in the token that we saw on our landing page. Let's revisit our landing page for just a moment to see what I'm talking about. Here's our landing page thank you note, but let's go back one. Now here, notice that in the query string, there's this token, which is a large blob. Now this token equals is being issued by Azure when we click that configure button. And we use it in our code to resolve the subscription. And so we call, using the Marketplace Client Library for .NET, we call the Fulfillment API .resolve async, and we pass the token in along with the cancellation token we took in on our action method. And from that, we get a subscription that we can actually work with. Now we also want to get for that subscription the associated plans so that we can display the plan that's currently active. And to do that, we go ahead and call list available plans async. Notice these are async methods, and they do have non-async companions associated with them in the API. Here we are passing the ID of the subscription into list available plans, which will give us the available plans so that we can loop through them, find the one that's being used by the current resolved plan, and we'll set that as the plan name. And finally, we can get the graph user from the graph service that came in on our constructor. So we can call me.request get async and get a graph API user to work with. Now, with all of these things available to us and all of this data, we're going to go ahead and fill out a model that will be used in our view. And we'll fill out display name. That's going to come from the graph APIs, as is email. However, subscription information like the name of the subscription, the fulfillment status, the subscription ID, etc., all of that is going to come from the resolved subscription, which has a lot of information in it about what's being purchased and by whom. So with that, we go ahead and call our return view with a model. Let's take a quick look at the view. Not that it's terribly interesting, but it does have the information in it that we're pulling off of our model, as you can see here. This code will be available to you in the repository, and you're more than welcome to tour it and spool it up and run it and use it for reference in building your own landing pages, which I'm sure are going to be far more attractive than the one I showed you. All right, so we talked about there being more data to display. We had all of those data resources available to us. Let's take a look at what we could display on our landing page. Notice on our landing page now there is a link for extra functionality for publishers. Now I just added this as a simple way to see what data is available to us to actually show to our customer. And this is it. There's a lot of data here, and we can start with what's in user claims coming off of that JOT token, right? And remember things like the tenant ID, which is shown right here, and we can auth against these things. Moving down, we can see that there are values coming from Microsoft Graph that I'm showing. Now, these are just some of many, many values that you can pull off Microsoft Graph using user.read permissions. But these are the primary things that we show on the landing page just to make sure we have this right in our subscription order. Here are some items that we can get about the resolved subscription. So we have that resolved subscription that we got by calling the resolve method, and these are many of the fields and values that we can get from that subscription. So you might want to show, for example, information about the publisher's email ID as opposed to the beneficiary's email, which may well be different. It's up to you what you want to show on that page. Finally, we can see all of the plans associated with this subscription, and perhaps even give our customer the ability to change plans on this landing page should you choose to do so. And finally, just for edification purposes, I went ahead and output the marketplace purchase ID token here, which is simply a URL decoded version of what we find in our query string up top. All right, so that was a trip through the available data that we have to display on the screen. So we saw the purpose and some code for our landing page, and we saw our landing page actually working and in action. And this is when we actually took a look at the code of the index action, and we saw how we were calling that SaaS fulfillment API. And then finally, we looked at some data that is available to you to put on your landing page should you choose to do so. And with that, I want to thank you so much for joining me for another module in the Mastering the Marketplace series. You can learn more by going to aka.ms/mastering the marketplace, where you will find videos, copies of our slides in PDF form, and even code like the code that you'll receive in this module to help you get your SaaS application up and running in as little time as possible.